You're standing in a crowd of strangers, thousands of them, every face slightly different, every person a complete mystery. And somewhere deep in your chest, something tightens. Not fear exactly, not quite anxiety. Something older than either of those words. Your brain just quietly decided that not one of these people can be trusted. That feeling is not irrational. It is not social anxiety. It is not a sign that something is wrong with you. It is one of the oldest survival programs in the human nervous system, running exactly as designed. The problem is that the world it was designed for no longer exists, and that mismatch is quietly reshaping the way modern humans relate to each other, and not in a way that is going well. This is the stranger effect, and understanding it changes how you see almost everything. Start with what your brain is actually doing when it encounters an unfamiliar face. Within 33 milliseconds of seeing a new person, a structure deep in your brain called the amygdala fires. It is doing a rapid threat calculation, not a conscious one, not one you get any input on. In a third of the time it takes to blink, your brain has already made a preliminary judgment. Friend or threat. Safe or unknown. One of us or one of them. Neuroscientist Joseph Ledoux spent decades mapping this process. What he found was that the amygdala does not wait for the thinking part of your brain to catch up. It acts first. It alerts the body first. Your heart rate shifts. Your posture subtly changes. Your attention narrows. All of this happens before you have consciously processed anything, before you have decided anything. The thought comes after the feeling, not before it. And the feeling, in the case of strangers, is almost always a quiet alarm. Now ask yourself why. Why would evolution wire that in? Your ancestors did not live in cities. They did not ride public transit with 200 unfamiliar faces pressed close around them. For almost the entire span of human existence, the world was small. Your band, your tribe, a few dozen people, maybe a few hundred at most. Anthropologist Robin Dunbar spent years studying the social structures of hunter-gatherer societies and arrived at a number that has become famous in social science. Around 150. That is the cognitive limit for meaningful human relationships. Beyond that, the brain starts to lose track. Beyond that, you're dealing with strangers. And in the world your ancestors inhabited, strangers were genuinely dangerous. Not always, not automatically, but often enough that the brain evolved a simple rule. Familiar equals probably safe. Unfamiliar equals possibly threat. Weight that error carefully. The cost of wrongly trusting a stranger was death. The cost of wrongly distrusting a stranger was just awkwardness. The math was clear. Build in suspicion. Let familiarity earn trust over time. That is the stranger effect. That is its origin. Now drop that ancient brain into a modern city. You wake up in an apartment surrounded by people you have never spoken to. You ride an elevator with a neighbor you have lived next to for 3 years without exchanging more than a nod. You walk into an office of 50 people and eat lunch alone. You scroll through thousands of faces on a phone screen and feel a hollow feeling you cannot name. None of this triggers alarm bells the way an actual threat would. But none of it sits right either. Because your brain is running an ancient social calculation in a world where the math no longer adds up. The average person in a modern city is physically surrounded by more people than their ancestors would have encountered in an entire lifetime. And yet, study after study shows that loneliness is not decreasing. It is climbing. Psychologist John Cacioppo spent more than 2 decades researching loneliness at the University of Chicago. What he found upended the common assumption that loneliness is just about being alone. You can be alone and not lonely. You can be surrounded by hundreds of people and feel profoundly, viscerally isolated. What drives loneliness is not the absence of people. It is the absence of the specific feeling of trust, belonging, and familiarity. It is the absence of people your brain has placed inside its small inner circle. And here is the counterintuitive piece. Cacioppo found that loneliness is not just an emotional state. It is a physiological one. Lonely people show elevated cortisol levels, disrupted sleep, heightened inflammatory response, and a measurably altered immune function. The brain, detecting that you are socially isolated from your trusted group, shifts into a defensive mode. It becomes hypervigilant. It starts reading more faces as threatening. It becomes more sensitized to social rejection. The very condition that loneliness creates, treating everyone like a stranger, makes it harder to escape loneliness. It becomes a feedback loop. Your ancestors were wired to survive in small groups because individuals who left the group, or who were expelled from it, faced a steep drop in survival odds. Loneliness hurt because it was supposed to drive you back toward the tribe. The pain was the signal. Return. Reconnect. Do not stay out here alone, but today, you're not alone. You're surrounded by strangers, and the brain cannot distinguish between those two states. Stranger and alone feel the same at the level of the ancient wiring. There is another layer to this, and it goes deeper. In 1954, psychologist Gordon Allport published a theory that became one of the most studied ideas in all of social science: the contact hypothesis. Allport argued that exposure to people from other groups reduces prejudice, but only under specific conditions. The contact had to be equal status. It had to involve cooperation toward a shared goal. It had to have institutional support. And it had to offer genuine personal acquaintance, not just proximity. That last part matters more than almost anything else, because proximity without contact is not the same as connection. Living in a diverse neighborhood does not automatically reduce the stranger effect. Commuting alongside people who look different from you does not automatically build trust. What Allport identified was that the brain needs something specific in order to reclassify a stranger as known. It needs repeated interaction. It needs cooperation. It needs the slow accumulation of shared experience until the amygdala updates its prior, until the unfamiliar face becomes familiar, until the alarm quiets. This is why cities that are physically dense can still be socially hollow. Proximity creates exposure, but not always the right kind. You can live above someone for a decade and never meet the conditions Allport described, and so the stranger remains a stranger, and the ancient brain keeps running its ancient program. What breaks the loop? Surprisingly small things. Research from psychologist Nicholas Epley at the University of Chicago found that strangers consistently underestimate how much they will enjoy talking to each other. In a series of studies, participants predicted that striking up a conversation with the person next to them on a train would be uncomfortable, awkward, unwanted. And then they did it, and consistently rated the interaction as significantly more enjoyable than they expected. The other person almost always responded positively. The conversation was almost always pleasant. The fear of the stranger dissolved almost immediately upon contact. But here is what Epley pointed out. People knew this was likely to be the result. They knew on some level that the stranger would probably be fine, and they still predicted discomfort, still chose not to engage. Because the ancient warning system is not calibrated to actual modern risk. It is calibrated to ancient risk. And ancient risk is very hard to override with logic. You feel the hesitation before you make the calculation. You feel it in your chest before your reasoning brain has even weighed in. This is what makes the stranger effect so persistent. It is not a belief you hold. It is a feeling you have. And feelings that wired into the body itself, do not respond well to being told they are wrong. What they respond to is experience. Repeated, low stakes, cooperative contact. The kind that hunter-gatherers had with their band automatically by virtue of shared survival. The kind that modern humans have to build deliberately against the grain of an environment that keeps them physically surrounded and socially isolated at the same time. There is something quietly important in all of this. You live in the most connected era in human history. You carry a device that can put you in contact with anyone on Earth in seconds. You live in cities engineered to concentrate human beings in space. And yet, the ancient brain is looking for something that none of that provides. It is looking for the slow building of familiarity, the sharing of meals, the cooperation towards something real, the kind of contact that turns a stranger into a known face, into someone the amygdala finally, quietly, stands down for. That is not something a platform delivers. That is not something density creates on its own. That is something you build incrementally in the specific way evolution built your brain to build it. Tonight, when you pass your neighbor in the hallway or sit next to someone you have never spoken to, the ancient warning will fire. In a third of the time it takes to blink, the calculation will already be running. But you will know what it is now. You will know it is not about that person. It is about every stranger your ancestors ever met. And that is exactly why it is worth overriding. Because 300,000 years ago, a stranger in the dark might have been a threat. Today, they are just someone your brain has not yet had the chance to.
Thanks for watching the video. Make sure to subscribe for more content like this.